When a liberal TV host tried to mock Chris Hemsworth on live television, thinking he could outsmart him, Chris didn't just fire back, he destroyed him. The audience wasn't ready. The internet exploded, and the TV host, completely humiliated in front of millions. Cameras were rolling, and what Chris said next left the entire studio in stunned silence. The stage was set, a high-profile live talk show, a massive audience, and millions watching from home. Chris Hemsworth sat calmly in his chair, dressed in a simple fitted suit, his signature charm on full display. The host? Smug, ready to go for the kill. This wasn't just an interview, it was an ambush. The host leaned forward smirking. Chris, you play all these strong, heroic characters. But let's be real. Do you actually think that kind of old-school masculinity still has a place in today's world? The audience shifted. Some chuckled, some nodded, others held their breath. Chris? He smirked, not nervous, not caught off guard, just amused. The host thought he had set a trap. But Chris? He was about to flip the entire script. And when he did, the whole room would lose it. Chris leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. The host waited, expecting him to stumble, to hesitate, but he didn't. Instead, Chris tilted his head, pretending to think. Then with a casual smirk, he said, "So, let me get this straight." The audience leaned in. "You're saying that strength, confidence, and standing up for what's right are outdated?" The host blinked. That wasn't the response he expected. He chuckled nervously, shaking his head. No, I'm just saying the whole alpha male tough guy thing, it's kind of a relic of the past, don't you think? Chris nodded slowly, as if considering it. Then he struck. Right? Because when things go wrong, the first thing people do is call the local poet for help. Boom! The audience erupted. Laughter, cheers, even some gas. The host's smirk faded. Chris didn't flinch. Look, I get it. It's easy to sit here in a nice studio with cameras and makeup and talk about how traditional masculinity isn't necessary anymore. Then he leaned in. But when your house is on fire, who do you call? The host froze. The audience was locked in. Chris kept going. When someone breaks into your home, when a flood hits your city, when real danger shows up, do you ask for less masculinity? Or do you ask for strong men who are willing to protect and serve? Silence. The host had nothing. Chris leaned back, smirking. And then he dropped the final hammer. Funny how this outdated idea suddenly becomes useful when reality kicks in. The audience lost their minds. Laughter, applause. Even the camera crew was grinning. And the host? He was visibly shaken, but he wasn't giving up yet. He tried to recover, but Chris was just getting started. The host shifted in his chair, forcing a chuckle. He wasn't expecting that. The audience was still buzzing from Chris's comeback. But the host? He wasn't done yet. He straightened his papers, trying to regain control. Okay, he said, forcing a smile. But come on, Chris, isn't it a little ironic? You talk about strength and traditional masculinity, but let's be honest, you're a Hollywood actor. You play pretend for a living. The audience let out a few oohs. Chris, unbothered. He tilted his head, amused. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice cool, steady. The host nodded, waiting. And then Chris flipped the entire conversation on its head. If you don't think strength and resilience matter, why do people love superhero movies? The audience reacted instantly. Laughter, claps, a few gasps. The host's smile twitched. Chris didn't stop. I mean, let's be real. If I played a weak, passive, helpless guy in those films, would anyone watch? The host opened his mouth, then shut it. Because he knew the answer. Chris grinned. People cheer for characters who stand up, fight back, and protect others, because deep down, we all know that's still important. Boom! The audience exploded again. Even some of the crew members behind the cameras were nodding. Chris leaned forward now, locking eyes with the host. So tell me, Do you think people love those stories because they want to see outdated ideas? Silence. The host had no response. His confidence? Gone. The audience? Completely on Chris's side now. And just when the host thought it couldn't get worse, Chris hit him with one last reality check. The host forced a laugh, clearly trying to shake off the moment. But Chris? He wasn't letting up. The audience was locked in now, waiting to see how the host would recover, if he even could. The host adjusted his mic, trying to sound confident. "Okay, fair point," he said. "But don't you think this whole tough guy narrative is kind of toxic? Like, isn't it time we move past the idea that men have to be strong all the time?" Chris smirked. Because this was too easy. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, and his voice dropped just slightly, controlled, sharp, and unshakable. "Let me ask you something." The host hesitated. "If someone breaks into your house in the middle of the night, do you want a protector or a poet?" Oof. The audience lost it. Laughter, cheers. Even a few, "Damn, he got him," from the back rows. The host? His face twitched. He tried to recover, but there was no coming back from that. Chris wasn't done. Strength isn't toxic. Weakness pretending to be strength is. The energy in the room shifted. Even people who had been skeptical nodded. Because he wasn't wrong, Chris kept going. The problem isn't men being strong. The problem is people acting like strength is a bad thing until they need it. Boom. Another direct hit. The host fidgeted in his seat. He could feel it now. The room was against him, and Chris, still completely in control. Then, Chris delivered the knockout punch. You don't have to like it, but when things go bad, strong men are the first ones you look for. Silence. The audience sat there, stunned, because at that moment, even the host knew Chris had just ended the debate. But what he did next took the entire interview to another level. The host was sweating now. He forced a smile, shifting in his chair, trying to find a way out. But the audience? They weren't on his side anymore. Chris had flipped the entire room, and he wasn't done. The host cleared his throat, trying to regain control. All right, he said, raising his hands. But let's be honest, Chris. This whole strong men save the world thing, it's just entertainment. Movies are fantasy. In the real world, people don't go around acting like superheroes. Chris tilted his head, amused. Oh, is that so? The audience leaned in. Chris adjusted his mic, his voice calm but sharp. So when firefighters rush into a burning building, that's fantasy? Boom. The first shot fired. The audience reacted instantly. A few gasps, some murmurs. People knew where this was going. The host's face twitched. Chris continued. When soldiers risk their lives to protect their country, is that just a movie script? Another direct hit. The host opened his mouth, then shut it, because he had no answer. Chris leaned forward now. When police officers, security guards, even regular guys step in to stop a robbery or protect someone in danger, are they just playing pretend too? Silence. The host's confidence shattered. The audience completely on Chris's side. Chris shook his head, his smirk turning serious. See, it's easy to sit in a safe studio and laugh about strong men being outdated, but the second there's real danger, the first thing you do is look for one. The audience exploded. Cheers, claps. Even the camera crew was grinning. And the host, defeated, his entire argument, destroyed on live TV. Chris leaned back, completely unfazed. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to admit it. But deep down, you know it's true. The host's face said it all. He had lost. But just when everyone thought the interview was over, Chris did something that left the whole room speechless. The host was out of moves. He sat there gripping his cue cards, his confidence completely shattered. Chris, still cool, still in control. The audience had fully turned. Even people who might have agreed with the host before were now nodding along with Chris. The host tried to laugh it off. All right, Chris, I see what you're saying. But come on, man, you're an actor. You don't actually live this stuff. It's just roles, just scripts. At the end of the day, it's all Hollywood, right? Chris smirked. Because now, the host had just set himself up for total humiliation. Chris sat forward, locking eyes with him. "You want to talk about Hollywood? Let's talk about real life instead." The host's smirk twitched. Chris didn't blink. "I grew up in Australia. My dad was a builder. My uncles were in the trades. I watch real men work hard, protect their families, and take responsibility every single day." The audience leaned in. Chris kept going. "And before I got my big break, I was working, cleaning equipment at a gym, moving furniture. I didn't wake up one day and land in Hollywood. I worked for it." Boom! Another hit. The host swallowed hard, because now, Chris wasn't just talking about masculinity, he was proving he lived it. Chris shook his head, his tone calm but cutting. "You sit here in a suit, under bright lights, in a safe studio, telling me what's outdated. But outside this bubble, people are out there fighting, working, and protecting their families every single day." The audience erupted. Claps, cheers. People were fully on Chris's side now. The host, visibly uncomfortable. He tried to change the subject, but Chris wasn't done. "Let me ask you one last thing." The host hesitated. "If traditional masculinity is so outdated, why is it that when something bad happens, people don't call the loudest critic?" The audience exploded. Laughter, applause. Even some crew members were nodding. Chris leaned back, arms crossed. The host, speechless. And then, Chris delivered the final knockout. The host sat there, stunned. No comeback, no witty retort, just silence. Chris, relaxed, smirking, unbothered. The audience, erupting. Some clapped, some cheered, some just sat there shaking their heads at how badly the host had been outplayed on his own show. The camera crew, trying not to laugh. The host shifted in his seat, forcing another chuckle. "All right, Chris, all right. You made your point." Chris raised an eyebrow. "Did I? Or did reality make it for me?" Boom! The audience lost it again. The host sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew. He lost. Chris had come in calm, collected, and respectful. But the second the host tried to make him look like a fool, Chris flipped the entire script. The host cleared his throat, trying to move on. "Well, anyway, let's talk about your upcoming movie." Chris grinned, because at that moment, he knew exactly what had happened. The host had invited him on the show thinking he'd make him look outdated. Instead, Chris made the host look out of touch. And the internet was about to make sure this moment lived forever. The interview wrapped up, but the damage? Already done. Chris Hemsworth had walked in as just another guest. Now, he was the story. The second the cameras cut to commercial, the host let out a frustrated sigh, pulling off his earpiece. But Chris, still grinning, still completely unbothered. The studio audience started murmuring, some laughing under their breath. Even the camera crew exchanged smirks. They knew. Everyone knew. Chris had just embarrassed the host on his own show. Live, unedited, and unstoppable. And within minutes, the internet got to work. Clips from the interview hit social media immediately. People weren't just watching, they were reacting. Chris Hemsworth just ended this host's career in 5 minutes. The moment he leaned in, you knew the host was finished. Imagine trying to mock Thor and getting obliterated instead. The host, trending, but not for the reasons he wanted. His own viewers turned on him. Critics called him out. And Chris didn't even have to say another word, because the internet was about to do the rest for him. The internet exploded. Clips from the interview spread like wildfire. Memes, reactions, commentary videos. People weren't just laughing at the host's failed ambush. They were cheering for Chris. Chris Hemsworth just gave the ultimate reality check. This is what happens when you try to clown a guy who actually knows what he's talking about. The moment Chris flipped the script, the host knew he was finished. The original video, millions of views overnight. Comment sections? Brutal. Some called it the most embarrassing interview of the year. Others pointed out how the host had walked right into his own destruction. And then, things got even worse for him. Other celebrities started chiming in, Actors, athletes, even public figures, all backing Chris. One even tweeted, "Chris Hemsworth didn't just destroy him, he educated him." The host tried to fight back, released a statement saying, "It was just a lighthearted debate, no hard feelings." But nobody bought it, because when you get humiliated on live TV, the internet never forgets. The host tried everything to regain control. Damage control tweets, interviews claiming the whole thing was misunderstood, even a desperate attempt to say it was all just for fun. But the internet wasn't buying it. Comment sections roasted him. "Nah, you got humbled. Just take the L. Chris didn't debate you, bro. He educated you." This is what happens when you try to sound smart and get schooled instead. The memes, relentless. Screenshots of Chris smirking during the interview were now GIFs. People edited clips to make the host's confidence drain in real time. And then, the final blow. A side-by-side comparison went viral. One clip, the host mocking Chris at the start. The other, the host completely silent after getting wrecked. Over 20 million views in one day. And Chris? He hadn't even acknowledged it, because while the internet was still laughing, Chris was already moving on. The host's career took a serious hit. His credibility, gone. Producers weren't happy. Sponsors started pulling back. His show, once a respected platform, was now being called the place where Chris Hemsworth ended a man's career. But Chris, completely unbothered. He didn't respond, didn't gloat, because he didn't need to. The internet had already won the battle for him. Meanwhile, Chris was back to work, filming a new project, doing charity work, living life like nothing happened. And then, it got even worse for the host. A major TV executive was asked about the incident in an interview. Their response? "We're looking at making some changes to the show's format." Translation? The host's days were numbered. The man who had tried to embarrass Chris Hemsworth on live TV was now fighting to save his own job. And Chris? He never even had to throw the final punch, because reality did it for him. There was no official announcement, no dramatic firing, no public apology. But within a few months, the host was gone. The network called it a new direction for the show. The real reason? They couldn't recover from the humiliation. Sponsors had lost confidence. Viewership had dropped, because no one wanted to watch a guy who had become a walking meme. Meanwhile, Chris, still winning. Every interview, every appearance, people brought it up. "Chris, that viral moment, legendary. Dude, you handled that so perfectly." How does it feel knowing you ended a debate in less than 5 minutes? Chris? He'd just laugh it off. "I was just having a conversation." But deep down, he knew. He hadn't just won an argument. He'd exposed a mindset that couldn't hold up to reality. And now, every time someone tried to mock strength, resilience, or masculinity, they remembered what happened to that host. Because in the end, truth doesn't need defending. It just needs to be heard.